Welcome back to the channel, guys. Let's get straight into today's story. Net zero is sold to the public as a moral necessity, a scientific obligation, and a financial opportunity all rolled into one. We're told it will save the planet, create jobs, and barely affect our daily lives. But beyond the headlines and political slogans, a very different picture is emerging. One where ordinary British families are quietly absorbing the real cost of a policy they were never properly consulted on. At its core, net zero is not just an environmental policy, it is a complete restructure of how Britain produces energy, heats homes, moves people, and prices everyday life. That kind of transformation doesn't come cheap. Yet the conversation around who actually pays for it is often avoided or deliberately softened. Now, the most obvious impact is energy bills. For years, households have been told rising costs are the result of global markets, supply shocks, or temporary pressures. But baked into every bill are green levies, subsidies, and infrastructure costs tied directly to net zero targets. Wind farms, grid upgrades, storage systems, and backup capacity all have to be paid for. And that money doesn't come from thin air, it comes from consumers. Supporters argue that renewable energy will eventually be cheaper, but eventually does a lot of heavy lifting in that sentence. Families struggling right now don't live in the future, they live in the present. And in the present, energy costs are higher, more volatile, and increasingly influenced by policy choices rather than pure supply and demand. Then there's home heating. Millions of British homes were built long before modern insulation standards existed. Retrofitting them to meet net zero expectations is enormously expensive. Heat pumps, insulation upgrades, new radiators, and electrical work can run into tens of thousands of pounds. Even with grants, many households are expected to cover significant costs themselves. For families already stretched by mortgages, rent, food prices, and childcare, this isn't a lifestyle upgrade, it's a financial burden. And the quiet truth is that many of the people designing these policies don't live in the kinds of homes affected by them. Transport is another pressure point. Petrol and diesel cars are being steadily discouraged through taxation, regulation, and long term bans. Electric vehicles are promoted as the alternative, yet they remain expensive, infrastructure is uneven, and charging costs are rising. For households outside major cities where public transport is limited, this isn't about choice, it's about compliance. The result is a growing divide between those who can absorb the cost of transition and those who can't. Net zero may be framed as universal, but its impact is anything but equal. Wealthier households can adapt, upgrade, and insulate themselves from the costs. Lower income families are left exposed. What's especially frustrating is how little democratic debate this has received. Net zero targets were adapted with cross party enthusiasm, minimal scrutiny, and almost no discussion of trade offs. Once set, they became untouchable, insulated from challenge by moral framing. Question the cost, and you're accused of denying reality or lacking compassion. But asking who pays is not denial, it's basic responsibility. Another hidden cost is economic competitiveness. Energy intensive industries face higher operating costs, making British manufacturing less attractive. Jobs are lost, production moves overseas, and emissions don't disappear. They simply exported. Britain looks virtuous on paper while global emissions continue to rise. This is the contradiction at the heart of net zero policy. Britain contributes a small fraction of global emissions, yet is imposing some of the highest costs in its own population. Meanwhile, major polluters expand production with fewer constraints. The environmental benefit is marginal, but the domestic cost is substantial. There's also the issue of resilience. A system heavily reliant on intermittent energy sources requires backup redundancy and complex management. Now, that complexity costs money and introduces risk. When the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine, families still expect the lights to stay on. Ensuring that reliability is expensive, and again, the cost flows downward. Net zero has also changed how policy is made. Long-term targets override short-term realities. Economic pain is justified as necessary sacrifice. Concerns are dismissed as transitional ideas, but for families living month by month, there is nothing theoretical about higher bills or enforced upgrades. The public was promised a green transition that would be painless, affordable, and fair. What many are experiencing instead is uncertainty, rising costs, and a sense that decisions are being imposed rather than agreed. None of this is an argument against caring for the environment. It's an argument against pretending that net zero is free, or that its costs are evenly shared. A serious policy requires honesty, and honesty means admitting that net zero is a choice of real consequences. The real question isn't whether Britain should reduce emissions, it's whether it should do it in a way that protects families, preserves economic strength, and respects democratic consent. Right now, too many people feel they're paying for a vision they had no say in shaping. Beyond the headlines, net zero isn't just a target, it's a transfer of cost, responsibility, and risk, and British families are right at the centre of it. Thanks for watching, guys. If you want more honest political commentary and don't want to miss what's really happening behind the headlines, hit that subscribe button and drop your thoughts in the comments below.